To wrap up the second unit of Women's and Gender Studies, I decided to make a video discussing sex, gender, and the spectrum of femininity and masculinity as they relate to society. I broke the overarching themes into 7 key concepts, which you can pause here to read. While they do aid in conceptual analysis, each concept has more depth than what I'll be discussing, but I'll be trying my best to get across a detailed and concise message of each of them. To begin this conversation, we first have to establish some things, these being what is sex, what is gender, and how do they relate to femininity and masculinity. Sex as defined by Barker and Shield in their book Gender, a Graphic Guide, is seen as referring to whether a person is biologically male or female, while gender as Barker and Shield define it is whether this biological male or female identifies socially as a man or a woman. I want to reiterate this point to make it clear. Sex doesn't equal gender. Sex deals with things like chromosomes and reproductive organs, and even then, there are some gray areas in this case, as some people are born intersex or with both male and female organs. On the other hand, gender is a social identity. Everyone is born male or female with exceptions for intersex people, but these people can choose to present as a man or woman, or masculine and feminine. No one is inherently born masculine or feminine. So now that that's clear, we get to the question of how sex and gender relate to femininity and masculinity. Well, it was basically explained when differentiating between sex and gender. In most of society, once you're born and determined to be male or female, your parents or caregivers automatically set you up to present as masculine or feminine. Even if they don't notice it, they could begin with something as small as dressing a girl in pink or a boy in blue once they're born. These impositions of gender or gender roles/conformity come from the mistake of equating sex with gender, and in doing so, society automatically places a child within a feminine or masculine role before they're even conscious. Children or newborns in this case are molded to be a man or a woman before they even have the ability to conceptualize being a human. To show how society constructs gender and exemplify the depth of the implementation of gender roles on children, I'm going to read an excerpt from Anne Foster Sterling's book, Sex/Gender, Biology in a Social World. And I quote, "If light matters for the development of vision, maybe newborns that spend a lot of time in pink environments develop better pink detecting eye to brain wiring than children surrounded by blue. If this were the case, it would be a great example of a cultural conceit that literally shapes little infant bodies in gender-specific ways," unquote. For transparency's sake, this excerpt is focusing on scientifically studied concepts rather than hard theories, but this is still evidence of society playing a big factor in constructing gender based on sex. With these terms cleared up, we're now faced with the questions of what is femininity, what is masculinity, and what's the difference? At first the answer might seem clear-cut, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Femininity doesn't have a clear-cut definition, but it does have traits that we can attribute to it, these being passiveness, sensitivity, expressiveness, weakness, and the ability to nurture. Masculinity has the same problem, as most of the time it's just defined as the opposite of femininity, but there are qualities we can usually attribute to masculinity, such as aggressiveness, emotional and expressiveness, sexual aggressiveness, and strength. Most people would agree on these qualities being pretty good guidelines for what a woman is as opposed to a man, but there's a problem. Both sexes can exhibit these traits. A biological female who even presents as a woman can definitely be aggressive and possess strength. Just look at people like Ronda Rousey or a fictional person like Wonder Woman. And a biological male can nurture and be sensitive. While not seen as much, there are figures like Mr. Rogers, or to give a fictional example who isn't even a human, SpongeBob. Yes, there definitely are ways to present masculinity or femininity, but as I've shown, qualities of character don't really play a factor, as they're human traits rather than those of a boy or a girl, and even the most manliest of men or daintiest of women constantly dip in and out of the two gender representations. Aside from traits, there's ways of dressing too. Anyone not conforming to the norm is bound to get some type of attention. Just off the top of my head, I think of people like Prince, Lenny Kravitz, or Rick James. While all of them are males who identify as heterosexual, they all exhibit masculinity differently from the status quo. Women in general have more freedom than men in terms of dressing, but this is the truth for them as well. While not heterosexual, I think of people like Queen Latifah or Billie Eilish, who got lots of attention for not fully presenting as what society thinks a woman is, and dressing in a more masculine way. These people choosing to dress differently just scratches the surface of accepting gender roles within a spectrum rather than adhering to strict guidelines. Language also has a prominent role in the societal construction of gender. Choosing to not conform to the boxes that society puts you in at birth as a male or female is bound to be met with resistance. This can come in the form of name-calling, bullying, or a lack of communication between the two parties. A male who expresses some traits associated with femininity can expect to be met with names like fag, sissy, or have a questioning of their sexuality overall, which on a side note is a completely different thing within itself. These behaviors push toxic ideals, which in turn develops into toxic masculinity. Then there are biological females who can expect to be met with names such as butch, dyke, lesbo, and a plethora of other insults. Even if an individual decided they want to present in a way that doesn't conform with their sex, society may push them in a box or limit their representation through the use of fear or exclusion. There's terms like you hit like a girl or you throw like a girl, which imply physical inferiority of females to males. On the other hand, there's rhymes we sung in elementary school that talk about boys going to Jupiter to get more stupider, implying that a boy can't be smart or that they don't care about education. While harmless in a vacuum, sayings like these can plant the seeds of a notion in boys that being educated is girly or not needed. Something I want to touch on now is, where do these ideas of masculinity and femininity come from? To be honest, there isn't a clear-cut answer, as it's sort of a chicken and the egg type of question. Along with that, we give words meaning. Masculinity could have easily been the term we use to define what we think a woman should exhibit. Different societies have different views on masculinity and femininity, and it's been this way forever. For example, in some native cultures, there's a belief in two-spiritedness, in which they don't see gender as something that closely aligns with sex, and rather present both. And then there are tribes in Africa, where women do some things we consider masculine, like hard labor in the form of farming or even hunting. But to try and narrow it down, I researched, where does the modern Western idea of gender come from? To my surprise, the idea is new, with the term gender being coined in 1955 by a sexologist of the name John Money to describe human characteristics. I originally thought our modern Western ideas of gender were rooted somewhere in Christianity, but it turns out the idea of gender we have today stems from US propaganda. In an article I found on LinkedIn, it states, quote, "During the 20th century, gender became a tool for psychological manipulation in the United States, used to mock political alliances and racial differences by creating social hierarchies. For example, male reformers in the early 20th century were often perceived as feminine and lacking. Additionally, European narratives of the New World used gender to portray monstrous Indian and African women, emphasizing perceived racial differences," unquote. So there it is. Gender as we see it now is propaganda. Kind of. Potential American psyop aside, for the last part of this video, I want to talk about the negative consequences of not allowing gender to be looked at on or as a spectrum and rather in rigid structures. Some things I've noticed personally as a male who does present and identify as a heterosexual man is the lack of disclosure men have within each other. The toxic ideals of how men are supposed to present, or toxic masculinity, often deters many men from talking about their problems or seeking out life-changing help. This can be reflected through crime statistics or the rate of male suicides. In a 2021 study done by a men's mental health charity, they found that 60% of men don't share their feelings with anyone, with claims of them feeling as if it's not masculine and them feeling the pressure to be strong being cited as the top reasons for not doing so. On the other hand, women throughout history have been shut out by men from opportunities that should be based on merit rather than sex or gender, in places including but not limited to fields in STEM, academic areas in general, positions in government, sports, entertainment, music, and many, many more places. Not to disregard these heavy-hitting topics, but things as simple as freedom of expression are stunted through the conformity to the societal structure of gender as it relates to sex. There are so many creators out there who started late or may never start at all because of society's tendency to push us into a box where we aren't allowed to express or grow to our full potential. As I stated in the beginning of the video, everything that I talked about in this short time has way more depth than I touched on, but I do want to end with this. By maintaining the barriers of sex and gender in our modern world and not embracing them as something everyone can be, we are greatly stunting the growth of not only individuals but society as a whole. With the push to be more inclusive and allow greater freedom of expression, we can move towards a world where people aren't as afraid to seek help and see representation for all people in all aspects of life.